started on the recording. I don't know how much Zoom experience like you have, but one of the things I've found is that there can be long, uncomfortable silences sometimes on Zoom while maybe folks are unmuting. And I'm just going to allow them to sort of hang there for a little bit so that people can unmute or potentially ask questions. Because like a conference call, it's a little bit better than the conference call, but it allows, giving some space allows people to ask, sort of jump in and ask questions. It's harder to do that on Zoom. So just so you're aware, there may be some long pauses that I allow to hang there for a little while. But well, let's get started. I'll do a quick intro about Amory, about our program, and then I'll just ask each of you, Sarah, Suzanne, and Jake, to just in a couple minutes, whatever you wish to speak about, maybe a quick story or talk about your business, but also about you and sort of, you know, in short term, sort of the journey in which you're taking. So not so much maybe your elevator pitch, but more story based of your entrepreneurial journey in maybe a few minutes. So Amory stands for Accelerate Montana's Rural Innovation Initiative, and we are funded under the EDA, Economic Development Administration. And we were actually created by the EDA and funded a university center, the first one at the University of Montana ever to have a university center. And it's a 5-year grant to support entrepreneurship across rural Montana. And we do that basically in 2 ways. One, direct coaching and support for individual entrepreneurs as frequently and often as they would like, provided there's some learning going through those meetings. And the other way really is, I spoke to a little bit earlier before I started recording, is building the ecosystem. And by that, I mean, really the entrepreneurial ecosystem Montana, I think can grow and be better by connecting entrepreneurs to each other, like you all with each other, but you all with new entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs, but also with mentors and with resources. So whether that resource is attorneys or financiers, with banks or venture capital, whatever might be the right fit for your particular business, our role is to be that link and to try to make those introductions and connect you to those resources that you need. So that's really what we're trying to do, is build that ecosystem, that community, if you will, across the state, so that rural entrepreneurs have, essentially, our goal would be that anybody in Montana would have the same resources as somebody starting a business in the Bay Area or in Colorado or someplace. So that's really our goal. And these office hours are a weekly event for us to just have a conversation together and to sort of be a part of that community building. So with that, let's see, Suzanne, Sarah, Jake, which of you would like to go first? Anybody want to just dive in? Otherwise, I'll just go by the screen order. All right. How about Sarah? You're because you jumped on first, you're on the left of my screen. So if you would, just maybe a quick story, or share whatever you wish to sort of describe Bumper Root Foods, your business, and a bit about the journey of where you are. Thinking about that in this conversation, our focus is going to be about how you navigated and continue to navigate the challenges and maybe the roadblocks that are thrown up in your way as you got started. And maybe they continue now, but really think about that sort of early stage, the early time is as you got started. How did you get through those challenges? You don't have to share that now, but that's kind of where we're going.
Great. Well, there are plenty of those and still plenty of challenges. I grew up in Montana, and my grandparents had been in agriculture. They were ranchers, so kind of heard all the stories of ranching, but my parents' aunts and uncles weren't in agriculture, so I was a little bit removed from it, and went to college, and after college moved to DC and ended up working for Max Baucus. And since I was from Miles City, they thought I should do agriculture issues. And so I got a crash course in agriculture policy, and I really loved it and loved being able to come back and work with our agriculture producers and learn more about the history of agriculture in our state and the impact it had on our economy. And then I went to business school and worked in the corporate world for a long time, but really wanted to get back to food and agriculture. So I moved to Zimbabwe, where I was working with the agriculture industry after the collapse of commercial farming there and after trillion% inflation. And although I knew we had issues in our food system in the US, for some reason it took being across the world to have it really amplified, and watch as donors and other groups were trying to put the US really chemically based agriculture system onto small farmers in Africa, where it didn't make sense, and realized it didn't really make sense in the US either. And started really digging into why do we eat the food we eat, and how does the food work to get to the grocery store, and why do we have the products we do in the grocery store? And I realized it was really based around corn, soy, wheat, and sugar. And so started really thinking about, well, what can we do to create a more diverse food system and create more diverse food products at the grocery store? And to me, that meant starting up supply chains that were, at that time, we were using the word sustainable, and now regenerative or restorative ingredients and food systems that really work with nature instead of against them, and instead of against it. And that encompasses from everything from inputs to how workers are treated to community and equity. And so we started with using the baobab tree in Africa because it was wild harvested. It came from trees that were hundreds to thousands of years old, and those trees really formed a central element of the community, and there was no input required. They just, when they're ripe, they fall to the ground, and yet they have incredible nutritional benefit. So we started selling just the baobab powder, and then created a hydration drink because of its electrolyte capabilities, where we added the coconut water and searched for a great coconut water supply chain, which we found in India. And that product has just grown over the years, and especially this year. So that day in March when the market crashed and shelter in place was about to happen, and we realized things were, the world was changing for us. We had our best day of sales ever, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And we contacted our coconut water supply chain, and they were really excited because we were having to place a big order. And then later that day, they actually came back and they said, well, India shut down, so we don't know when you're going to get this product. And we were sold out, and that's our income, and that's my income. And so it was pretty scary, but we knew we'd been planning a pipeline of other products, the Montana products. This next year, we'll have a lentil and regenerative beef product coming out. And so quickly, even that day, I started reaching out to other brands I knew that told the story of regenerative agriculture, and started buying from them wholesale. And we put up a regenerative marketplace up on the website. And now this year, happy to go into it more, but it's just been, we're just realizing that the fundamental way supply chains worked are changing, which is wonderful in a way for the food system I want to see, but really frustrating when you're trying to scale and build a business. And when we have the demand like we do, like we've been taken off store shelves because we can't keep in stock, and we have upset customers because their orders come in late. And just today we found out the coconut water for a production run supposed to be done next week. Actually, they sent animal feed instead of coconut water. So we're learning that just with COVID, it's not just impacting the way supply chains work, it's impacting the efficiency, which is kind of what we've been fighting against anyway. But with people being sick, just every person that it takes to make a business work, everyone's struggling, and people are getting sick, and not mistakes are happening. And it's been kind of one step in front of the other, while looking at our overall goal, which is to really tell the story of the producers and food systems around the world that are really working and doing things in the right way. That was a long introduction.
No, thanks for putting, there's a couple points there that we'll come back to, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think there's some, we'll come back to that. But Jake, you're actually the next one on my list, or in my order on the screen. So if you would, a little bit about yourself and the business. And
yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I grew up here in Montana on the family farm. I'm a 5th generation farmer, and growing up, my dad raised barley and wheat and alfalfa, just kind of big field crops, sold at commodity prices. And that didn't really strike me as that interesting. So I wound up going to college for mechanical engineering, and worked as an engineer for a little bit, and just hated, staring at a computer. So wanted back to farming, but I didn't want to do the big field crop sort of thing like I grew up seeing my dad do. Prices kind of dictated by the market at large, just didn't make a ton of sense to me. So started researching specialty crops, smaller scale stuff that would work on a smaller acreage, little less inputs, but much higher margins, something that was a little more decentralized. And I loved beer, craft beer at the time. So it was like, let's give hops a shot. So we just started putting hops in the ground, started talking to brewers, trying to understand what they wanted as far as like an end product, what they needed to make beer. And over the course of we started in 2015. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, we put together a really small scale production setup that we could crank hops out of, and got enough positive feedback and momentum out of that basically over the last 5 years, every year we've had to either build a new hop yard or build a new facility, until this year. This was the first year that we just kind of were proving out the whole system. So we've got 3 hop yards now and 1 full scale production facility that we're cranking hops out of. Yeah, COVID has been weird for us with the shutdown and everything, like with restaurants and breweries and everything being shut down. Beer production and beer consumption was way down. So breweries just were not making beer. So that was the weirder thing, that we've only seen sort of a massive upswing in the craft beer market. There's been nothing but growth for, I'd say almost 8 years, 10 years, something like that in the craft beer sector. And, with the forced shutdowns, with restaurants being closed, beer consumption is just way down. So that's something that we're trying to navigate right now. That's a big challenge for us. But yeah, love it. I love farming. It's a fun way to live.
Yeah, interesting. Well, a couple things there too I'd like to come back to. But Suzanne, how about you share a little bit about you and your business story?
I'd love to. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I did not intend to create what could be an international business at this late stage in my life. I will turn 73 very shortly. I am a retired biometrician. That's a mathematician applied to biological problems. I'm born and raised in Butte, Montana. I spent most of my life in Chile and Alaska working for natural resource management agencies. And as my parents aged, I moved back to Montana to care for them, bought a little piece of property along the Bitterroot River, and opened a boutique guest ranch because I love horses and I love sharing my knowledge of natural resource, because I've spent my life in natural resources and wildlife and fisheries. And then in 2011, I collaborated with the University of Montana, and we installed a web camera above an osprey's nest. And by the second year, we had 800,000 people watching from across the world. And when I went to turn off the web camera at the end of the first breeding season, people emailed me, phone called me, wrote letters and said, please don't do that. We want to watch your ranch, because they could see the animals and the activities behind the web camera. Most of the scene in the web camera is of the osprey's nest because it's very close to it. But they could see horses coming and going and people coming and going, and they got enamored. And at first I did not understand this. I thought, get a life. What do you mean you want to watch my ranch, And then I became gravely ill. I nearly died. I was in my family room. I had 3 major surgeries in 4 months. And during that time, instead of watching TV, I started operating my camera and tweeting with others who were watching with me. And I suddenly realized this was way better than watching TV, because it was real life in real time, and you could communicate with others while it was happening. So my research side kicked in, and I formed a focus group of people who lived from England across North America to Hawaii and even Japan. And I did a deep dive on what they were looking for. And I came to understand that people who are homebound, particularly seniors and people living with disabilities, are desperate for community because they cannot leave their home. And so, and this is the accidental part. I really didn't intend to make money with this, but I realized I have to make money to sustain it, to keep it going. But my first 8 years have been R&D. I mean, I'm at the end of the road, and you can imagine what my bandwidth was like, especially for uploading. I'm an uploader, not a downloader. And I'm uploading live web camera feeds, which of course is really high demand. So I ended up, it took about 5 years for me to work with a company in Missoula to install special equipment on the Lola water tower so I could microwave my web cameras and expand my network to include more web cameras. I now have 5 constantly broadcasting cameras that have night lights and ambient audio. And I've created a social engagement platform. So if you want to think of this, it's really melding Netflix with Facebook. I provide entertainment and I provide a social engagement platform that is two-way. I will, for example, wear a cell phone Bluetooth around my neck with a cell phone in my pocket, be talking to somebody in Georgia, and they will tell me where to go on my horse. So everybody is watching while I'm talking to somebody in Georgia or wherever, and they're watching me go across the Bitterroot River and up in the mountains on my horse. And so it's like moving a person instead of an avatar. And I've developed a number of programs to bring my viewers right in front of the screen as well. I have a program called Fur and Feathers, where they send me photos of their dogs and cats and their pets, and I get them on the phone and I do a PowerPoint basically with them narrating their lives to all of the other people. And what this has done is it's created incredibly robust social relationships. We even attended the funeral services of one of our members who died in Manhattan. I contacted the church where the services was held. They live streamed, I picked it up, and we all went to the funeral together. And that's how close these people have become, to the point where they are following each other. Somebody disappears, they track them down in a hospital, in a nursing facility, and reach out to them. So it's a network of building communications and community among people who are homebound. Of course, the pandemic has just increased the demand, but
Yeah.
it has also made investors very skittish. And I have, in working with the University of Montana Business School, they have termed my product a blue ocean product, because there's really no competition. Nobody is doing anything quite like we are doing, which I find is great in that, you can capture the market, but first you have to get to market, and people don't understand what you're doing. And so I have collaborated with the University of Montana, and now Texas University is doing a project on me where I hope to become certified as a medical intervention for loneliness, because loneliness has huge health consequences. And so I'm on the path to getting certified to be, something that a doctor could prescribe for somebody. But it's a long, hard road when people don't quite understand what you have. And then during the pandemic, the senior industry, of course, has been turned upside down, particularly in residential facilities, nursing homes and assisted care facilities. Their costs have gone through the roof because of all of the COVID and the issues that they've been having to deal with. So that market kind of closed to me right now, but I think it will reopen to me as they understand that this is the kind of program they have to provide their seniors with ongoing activities, even when there are adverse conditions. But right now they're focused on, expenses related to COVID.
Yeah, well, I've known a bit about your business, Suzanne, but that's a great explanation of it in more detail than I actually knew. And I think maybe a good segue into one of my questions here, and I'll ask Jake and Sarah you as well. But so when you were starting that, you articulated, hey, it's really hard to get going when you have something that no one understands. And I've talked to a couple of entrepreneurs actually in the last couple of weeks that are sort of in a similar position. Can you describe maybe a little bit more detail how you might navigate that? And let me add a bit, because a couple of folks I've talked to sort of feel like this, well, the goal is here, I have to convince everybody that my idea is right, or convince everybody, show everybody what I see. Suzanne, would you describe that as your approach, or has that been successful, or how might you address that?
Well, I've come to understand that people like analogies. Netflix combined with Facebook. That people in the movie industry, it is will use that kind of analogies all the time to describe a project, and I have found that that's very useful if you can find something that is similar but not quite. All right, and the other thing is, even though I have demonstrated my product, I have paying members. I've had paying members within the senior industry. It's still, until you break through, particularly when you're dealing with a very old, well-established industry like the senior industry. Breaking into that is very, very difficult. They're very cost focused. And the area that I'm coming into, the activities aspect of it, is probably the lowest on the totem pole of all of the things that they have to look at. And so I find that, number one, the research that I'm doing with the University of Texas and University of Montana has been really critical to opening doors for me within the senior industry. Validating the effectiveness of my product is really big, and that's a long runway. And so this is where my problem has been, is I know I have an effective product, but my runway into the senior industry is long. And so I'm looking for investors that will help me sustain and build while I'm on this runway. And it's research, I think, is a really important part of all of this. And I'm really happy that, 2 years ago, I collaborated with the University of Montana. And just this year, we gave a presentation at the National Council on Aging, which has opened up many, many doors. But without that research, I couldn't have been on stage at the National Council of Aging. So there's, when you have something new, you really have to establish its effectiveness or its marketability. And that's a long process.
Yeah, thank you. Jake, how about you? I mean, same kind of question, but maybe could be very different route. When you got started, as you said, it had a lot of growth in the industry, but maybe a little bit about what did you run into when you're thinking about, okay, you had this idea, you came out of working as an engineer, you went into, okay, I want to get back to agriculture, did the research, decided to play around with hops. What did you run into in those first few months or even year and how did you get around those challenges?
I mean, the two biggest problems that we ran into, and they're more or less solved, I suppose, at this point. The biggest hurdles, number one, was like convincing brewers that we were legit, convincing them that, convincing our customer that this was not, this wasn't going to be a flash in the pan. This was, we were in this for the long haul, and that we could actually meet sort of the quality that they'd become accustomed to from the bigger guys. They're buying hops right now from, the equivalent of, Megacore, Costco, Walmart sort of operations, billion-dollar companies out of Washington and Oregon. And, I'm just Joe Blow off the street. How do I convince them that, what I can offer them is going to compare? So, figuring out how to do that was a big hurdle. Figuring out, how to pelletize, package, brand, market, how to build that system out. That was a big hurdle.
Sorry to interrupt there. Would you say a little bit more about that? How did you overcome that? What worked and what didn't work, maybe?
Well, at first we had no idea how hops were really sold. That was a really something that we didn't understand. When we put in 1 acre of hops, so we put in like a couple hundred plants, it wasn't that big of a deal, but we didn't even understand how to pick or process them. We didn't understand like what the brewers actually wanted as an end product. So it really just boiled down to talking to the customer, and that was the hard part of it, was like actually finding customers that would give us, a meeting, actual sit down face-to-face hour or two of your time to explain to us and show to us like what you want as an end product. That took some doing. They'd been, I assume, just approached by so many brewers or people with 1 or 2 hop plants, or people that weren't serious about it, that they kind of just were, whatever, here's another guy that wants to talk about hops. So just finding people that were willing to actually sit down, take us seriously. Because another part of it was I was so young. I started this when I was 19. So getting, professional brewers to sit down with a 19-year-old kid and talk business was like, not really on their radar. Right. Not the top of their to-do list. but we found a few folks that took us seriously, and that helped a lot.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think, and that's a great story. That you with some persistence, it sounds like, and continue to search for that customer conversation. At 19, you can start to break into it. But it sounds like very similar sort of challenges as Suzanne has too. That sort of showing these established organizations that you're real, you're legit, and you've got something that's that they really want, and talk to that customer on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I had a quick follow-up question for Jake. I think that you touched on a consistent theme we hear a lot from a lot of entrepreneurs, which is that kind of at times very frustrating cycle of trying to find like the right customer segment or like the right customer niche. And it seems for you, you had to go through a lot of conversations until you were able to kind of find the brewers who were able to work with you. How did you stay motivated throughout that process? Like what was your kind of strategy for going about it, and how did you work that out?
I mean, I just love beer, man. It's just really exciting industry to be in. Like that, it was really easy for me to just, I don't know, keep knocking on doors, and if you say no, like whatever, there's a million breweries, it's fine. I'll just find another one and talk to them. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, just like excitement for the industry, excitement for the business. If I wasn't into beer, if I wasn't excited about hops and brewing and talking to these guys about something that's fun, would have given up a long time ago for sure.
Can I comment on the age thing? It seems like Jake and I bracket the age spectrum here, and I too have really run into ageism. And it's a real issue. It's a real issue because people may not want to take a 19-year-old seriously, but they also wonder how long a 73-year-old is going to be in the game. And so overcoming that age issue and gender, I would assume Sarah's had some of these same issues, but also the place where you do live. We're talking about rural economic development, and I have gone to senior conferences in San Francisco and in LA and places like that, and people roll their eyes when they think of somebody on a ranch in Lola, Montana, creating a high-tech business that addresses loneliness. They just roll their eyes. They just don't have any idea what to do with me because of age, gender, and where I come from.
Wow, yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, definitely bias at play that you often have to overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, and in an industry that is so centered outside of Montana, that the senior industry, is really not in Montana in the sense that company headquarters are here or anything like that. They don't know what to do with you because they do have a prejudice against people from rural areas. Just
Sure.
plain and simple.
Yeah, sure. How about you, Sarah? How was when you were getting Bumbleroot Foods going, and what were some of those initial things you ran into that were really challenging, and how many of you navigated them?
I think we're still running into them. It's just, it's the new level of them all the time. It never stops. But, similar to both Jake and Suzanne, I think building up that trust with partners and that you are serious and that you are planning to be around. I think a lot of times people think, sometimes I'm embarrassed to say how long I've been at this. And then when you look at how long it takes to build those partnerships, that is the time aspect that can't be rushed. So even when it was wanting to start or work with supply chains we're wanting to work with, being so small or nothing yet, we really had to form relationships so that they would supply to us instead of just really big customers. Talking to stores and giving them confidence that we knew what we were doing and that we had a product that already had traction online. That was a big thing at the beginning. We actually started in Colorado, and the general way that you started a food company there was you go into some of the grocery stores there and you knock on the doors and get on the shelves, and then that showed traction to investors and they'd invest, and then you'd get into a regional Whole Foods, then national. There was kind of this roadmap for how things worked. But we had a product that didn't have a place on the shelf yet. And so buyers didn't know what to do with us. And so it just felt like we were knocking on doors all the time. And then I have friends who have an organic skincare company who've used an affiliate model for a long time where they promote, and they've been promoted by other brands or communities or influencers that have a similar community. And they're like, let's just test this out. Let's just put, about let's put we love your product in the office. So let's put an email out to our email list about your product and just see what it does. And we had $10,000 in sales that day. So it was like, oh, well, this is a lot easier than knocking on a lot of store doors. So we kind of stopped the store thing for a while because it was just so much easier to grow online. And then the struggle was we kept selling out, and it's still our struggle years later. And to Suzanne's investment point, we had a product that investors didn't understand yet, and a viewpoint of the agriculture industry that investors didn't understand yet, and a distribution channel that food investors didn't understand. So tech investors understood our distribution model but didn't understand food. They wanted to back like Soylents and things they thought had a tech food that they thought had a tech component, so that we were trying to get even more natural food didn't match their hypothesis, but they understood digital marketing. And then the food investors didn't understand digital marketing yet, but they liked our product, except we were a couple years before there was a place on the shelves for us. So part of it's been time, and just kind of, we just kept promoting our online sales, and the investors we had were mostly friends and family or people who really got it. We realized a lot of the more traditional investors in the space, like they do want to know, like Suzanne was talking about, a market, that there's already a market there. And we were a little bit too far ahead in a couple aspects where that wasn't proven out, even though we thought we could show traction. And this year we're really at a place now, people understand what we're saying when we talk about regenerative. There have been we had a company almost nearly identically copy our product that raised $1 million. But now investors actually like that stuff's happening, because they're like, oh, you're one of a group now. You're not the only one. But then, in speaking to Suzanne's comment about investment and having them understand people from rural areas or something that looks different, it is 90-something% of angel investors and VCs are men. And there's definitely a lens of problems that they see that they fund. And one story I always tell is of a friend, she's gone to Stanford. And I met her through a women's investment group. And she had raised quite a bit of money. She didn't have one white male investor, and she got put in front of a bunch of billionaires in New York. And her product was, and still is, financial literacy for kids, and a way for people to give gifts to kids that aren't a physical gift, that they can give them a way to either save, put into their college fund, or give to a charity. And when women heard this, they're like, yes, please, like no more toys in my house. This is amazing. I don't have to go shop for a gift. And they're like, let me invest right now. And when she talked to men, they'd be like, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that wasn't part of their daily experience. And so, not to like, it's nothing against men. It's just, we all have our perspective from our experience. And until we have more investors that understand rural economies and women in different ages, and that it's not coming just from one perspective, which Silicon Valley, in a way, I lived in San Francisco and I saw it and I was a part of it. It's a very narrow viewpoint. And I think COVID's going to force investors to look outside of that box, and look at things that they didn't look at as traditional investments, and seeing that those are going to be part of the economy going forward. Things like what Suzanne is doing, and what we're doing. Food has proven itself to be a good investment this year, which is great for us. But before that, not as many people were as interested as they are now, when now SaaS products for companies aren't as interesting as they used to be, when not everyone's in the office. Outside of Zoom, everyone's had to figure out different ways of working. So I think that capital environment is really changing due to COVID too, and hopefully in a way that helps people, like this cool business that Suzanne is starting, that there wasn't necessarily a viewpoint with a lot of a perspective for capital that was out there, and hoping more people are bringing that capital. We'll see that now.
Yeah, I think that last point definitely is an issue. We've been working on it for a little while, and it's definitely challenging in Montana for all the reasons I think you point out. I'd like,
We have a lot of Montana investors now who are seeing it, and I'd say over half of our investors are women, and it's changing. It's just finding kind of the right people to talk to and keeping at it.
absolutely. Yeah, it is changing. It's changing pretty rapidly. And I think COVID's in some ways accelerating that, maybe improving it. I'd just like to open it now to those folks that are on the call too. Shani, Colleen, Manny. Anybody have questions, thoughts?
Well, this is Manny, and it's interesting listening to everybody because I'm the old male in the group, and I have found pushback from just the opposite of what everybody's been talking about. Our product that we have is geared toward women-owned homes and first-time home buyers. And the investors we've talked to said, well, first of all, what do you know about women-owned homes? And what do you know about first-time home buyers? And so to have a product geared in that situation has been very interesting, because everybody here that I've listened to has got their own journey they're going to. And I've even talked to investors, and they said, well, we only invest with owners and founders that are female or a minority. So here we're out there just getting the same situation, and our product is geared toward, like I said, the first-time home buyer. Is what do we know about being 21, 25 years old and buying a home? So it's been interesting, in our situation, but it's kind of interesting listening to everybody's story, because we all have these little roadblocks. But I think the main thing is keep moving forward. And our staff that we have are all young people, and all of our focus groups are all women. So we've gone after that to get their thoughts and their beliefs and their input. But when you're out there trying to navigate financing and so forth, I think there's roadblocks that everybody's got to look at and figure out how to overcome.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading a comment in the Colleen's posted here, but I think as you're articulating what we're running into, or what you're all have articulated you're running into, is the bias in the finance sector that each individual group or individual as a venture capitalist or so forth carries with them, that they have their lane that they like and they understand. But if anything sort of, as you all are describing, you're doing innovative business models that are outside of their expected lane, it creates a barrier for you. Just not something they're accustomed to seeing.
Well, it's interesting. I actually came from Washington, D.C. to Montana, and I worked with the Reagan administration with the SBA program. I was on their board, and we would be divided up into age groups. So we had like 8 to 9 year groups that when an entrepreneur came in for a loan, it would be put to that loan committee based on their age group. So the analogy would be is if you took somebody that started a company like Facebook and they sat in front of a bunch of 60 to 70-year-old guys, they're going to say, this ain't going to work. And we all know where Facebook is today. But I also watched in the late 70s and 80s that they took all those committees out because it was age discrimination based on how we were looking at approving loans. So here we sit 30, 40 years later, and we're still dealing with the bias based on a lot of these situations.
Yeah. And I think that's it's definitely a theme that we hear for a lot of folks, is running into that bias. And let me see if we take this in a little different direction. I think it's definitely a theme we've got going here, but let's see if let me ask this in a different way. Are there any, for any of you, I'll just open it up. Are there any, or were there any skills, say like marketing, finance, everybody's talking about relationship building, but are there any business skills that you had or you wish you had early on that helped you get over this? Maybe this is a bias, or start to get over this challenge that you're all articulating here. Anybody can jump in. Yes, Sarah.
First, I love what Manny said about it's just always about moving forward. I think just having that momentum keeps you from getting stuck, because it's your businesses are personal. So you get personal when an investor or someone's like, oh, I don't get what you're doing, or I don't see this potential. So I think so much of it is just to keep moving so you don't get stuck in the psychological mentality of like, oh, someone doesn't believe in what I'm doing. And so I think I think that's actually such a huge thing. I know he just said it very quickly, but keeping that momentum and keeping moving, you're going to find that next person and that next person. And, it's just going to switch, that person who didn't get it, but then you're going to, ricochet off and find that person who does get it. And it's about not getting stuck or bogged down when people don't get it, but use it and recalibrate. I'd say over any specific business skill, that has probably been the most important thing for me, because at any point you can learn, you can figure out anything. There's so many resources out there. You can figure out any of kind of the core skills, but I think curiosity and a willingness to always be learning, always to question your assumptions. And then, like Manny said, just to always keep movement going. Because that's when things get hard, when you feel stuck or feel like there's not a way forward because you just got an animal feed instead of coconut water. You have to be creative and be like, okay, now what does this mean for us? So I don't know if it's a specific business skill, but I just keep saying it, but just that keeping momentum going, no matter in which avenue, if it's momentum in the marketing, momentum in the financing, just keeping momentum going, I think is just so important.
I think one of the things that I just recently began to understand, and I wish I had known earlier on, is that looking for an investor is really looking for somebody who shares your values and mission. Investors are not like a bank where you go and you take out a loan and you do with that what you will. If you're asking somebody to be involved in your business, you really need to align yourself with somebody who shares your missions. And the reason I say this is I did get before a number of venture capitalists who really understand the blue ocean aspect of my product. And I think it has the potential for being a Facebook-like engagement platform. So there's enormous potential here. And one of the first questions that was asked of me is, are you willing to sell in 5 years to a Netflix or to a Facebook or be absorbed by a larger company? And my answer was always no. I'm not interested in that, in the sense that I'm interested in building something that's sustainable for my local community as well as for my online community. And I believe, and so my values in terms of where I've wanted the business to go were not aligned at all. And it made me understand that I had to be very careful about both. I had to select somebody as much as they had to select me. And I did not understand that at the beginning.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jake, any thoughts on that? Any skills you feel like were important or you wish you had?
Yeah, I suppose two things that I've sort of learned along the way that I wish I was better at initially, but I mean, I feel like a lot of the skills to build a business you kind of learn along the way. You can't go into it with any sort of 100% preparation. I suppose one of the first ones would be like when we initially started the business, and probably you guys can relate to this as well. You kind of say yes to everything. It's, yes to every meeting, yes to every phone call, yes to every opportunity, because there's just so few people saying yes. But at some point it sort of changes and you have to start saying no to certain things, like, I don't know, like for us in our specific business, when we started, homebrewers was kind of an attractive market for us, but the quantities that they're using at the scale that we're at now, it's just like, I don't take phone calls from random homebrewers, or I don't answer emails from random homebrewers anymore, because it's just not worth the time. So just that little transition from like saying yes to everything to saying, you know, I guess discerning what to say no to. That was something that I wish I'd been better at initially, because I said yes to a bunch of crap at the outset that was probably a waste of time. The other one, business, you know, talking about finances and investors, business has completely changed my perception of money, just in that, you know, when you're running a business, you know, understanding, you know, your cash flow and your burn rate and like things like that, understanding how money is moving and just the sums of money that are moving around, it's just not something that you can relate to your personal life, and it's not really something that a lot of other people can relate to, I suppose. I don't have a ton of friends that are entrepreneurs. Most of my other friends have, you know, 9-to-5 jobs or are working for businesses where they're getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, and they kind of, you know, have that paycheck budgeted for rent, food, whatever. Whereas with a business, you know, you're sort of watching this like roller coaster of money like come in, and then you buy a bunch of equipment, or like, you know, you're sort of watching these, it's just way more erratic, especially during the startup days, you know, where you do get an investor and they cut you a $100,000 check or whatever, and then, you know, poof, you spend it. You know, it's you know, it's just a little different perception of money than I think most folks have, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, Sarah, you took yourself off mute. You want to talk to that?
Oh, yeah, I just totally agree with that. Cash flow, I'd say understanding cash flow and managing that is like probably the number one most important thing and the most challenging thing. And I know people figure it out, but it's really hard at the beginning. Like it's always managing and figuring out, okay, I wait to pay this? Can this person give terms? Can this, because money flowing in and flowing out is very, very different. And I think figuring that out and getting comfortable with it, like Jake said, it's so different than your personal finances that it almost requires like a psychological jump to be comfortable with the amount of money coming in and out. I think there's just some almost like resiliency that has to be built there, just to not get caught up in like, whoa, that just left, and oh, this hasn't come in yet, and just really managing it as a flow and knowing it's always flowing in and out, and looking at it like that versus a static thing. It's not as predictable as a paycheck.
Were there any, I don't know if anybody wants to speak to more detail on this, were there any particular things that you did or you recognized as help or support in that aspect in terms of just cash flow? Let's just take that one on. That helped you build up that capacity or that resilience to maybe the anxieties created by that cyclical cash flow?
I always tell people the mistake I made and still make at times is not the very first thing I wish I would have paid for as a bookkeeper. Like just having taking that off, even if you can do it there, like everyone starting a business is smart. You can do everything, but you shouldn't do everything. And bookkeeping, I think, is the first thing people should hire someone to do, to pay that $200 a month or whatever it'll be, to have someone that you're accountable to, that you're making sure you're tracking things all the time. And it's just going to prevent a lot of sleepless nights, and just to know someone else you're supported on that element of the business. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what other people think about that too.
Yeah, me too.
I agree with that. Yeah, I found it very difficult to transition from focusing on my product to focusing on the business. And those are two completely different things. You know, they always say about working in the business or on the business. And making that transition, particularly because I do call myself an accidental entrepreneur, I didn't enter this from a business perspective. I entered from a public service perspective almost, to help people who are lonely. And so changing my perspective and paying really close attention to creating a business that could sustain that product was really became my focus. But it required a significant mental shift for me, and it required my divorcing myself from the emotional attachment to my product. So there were some, it was difficult for me, I'll have to say, because I really didn't enter this with a business mindset. You know, I'm going to use this to make money. No, I was developing a product that met a social need. And then afterwards, I said, oh, the only way this is going to be sustainable is to create a business. So, yeah, I had difficulty doing that.
Did you sort of read anything, or sort of, was there anything in that, when you made that transition, that mental transition, and sort of divorce yourself, as you say, from the idea, like you're married to this idea, because that passion is critical, right? Probably to keep you driving. You all said keeping going is important. Make that emotional change. Is there any particular thing you recognize or remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have a team and to get another mindset involved in the whole endeavor. And that, don't ask yourself to be the mindset for everything. I don't think I can make myself at this stage in my life be as business oriented as I need to be. And recognizing that and recognizing my own personal limitations and letting go to somebody who does have that business perspective. And so finding a happy medium in there, but by having more people than you in the boat. And, I immediately saw the need for technical partnerships, but I didn't understand what a complex thing it is to create a business as opposed to the product. And I realized I don't have the mindset for it. I mean, I'm a biometrician, I understand numbers, but I came at numbers from a very different perspective, and I continue with that. For example, creating a financial spreadsheet, projecting revenues. I've done mathematical modeling my whole life, and I want to know where all the assumptions are in those models. And financial models have different ways of making assumptions. And to me, it was all airy-fairy. I mean, it was all, you can do whatever you want to and put into this projection. You have no idea what share of the market you're going to get. This is ridiculous. And so I realized I had to step back and let somebody who is more comfortable in that arena, really take it. And there was a whole language that I did not understand because I had not spent my life in the financial world. So my advice is to find, just like a bookkeeper, I think you have to find somebody, if the product is your focal point, find somebody with whom you can partner that the business is their focal point.
Jake, I can imagine growing up in ag, you might have had a little bit more of an introduction than your peers to sort of that cyclical cash flow. Like in your family, you probably sort of had some exposure to it. Do you think that was a help or a hindrance to sort of being accustomed to this change in your financial understanding?
Yeah, I think in general it was really good preparation as far as just my patience goes. I'm extremely relaxed if a check isn't in the mailbox, and I'm pretty relaxed if we're out a bunch of money, just due to the nature of like growing up with that sort of situation. It did come at a really weird it came in a really weird way though, as far as like a business goes. Trying to run a farm and a business, it's weird because you only get one crack at it per year. We only get one harvest. So as far as like lean thinking and iteration and pivoting and all that, like we only get one of those per year. If you have a prototype and then you have alpha and a beta, and then you launch, and then you go back to the drawing board with a tech product or a physical on the shelf product, you can innovate and iterate really, really quickly. Whereas with the farm, we only got one try at it per year. So it's really weird to be 5 years in and think like, okay, we've only had 5 tries. That's we're still in the single digits as far as like the product goes. So I guess that was a lot weirder to me than the financial situation, but it did make me really patient as far as money goes.
Yeah. So we have about 4 minutes. This has been fantastic, you all. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully others you have too. Any last thoughts from the group? Sid, Manny?
One of the things, I've got a couple other businesses that have had, that are successful. I still have them, and starting the tech business was way above my head. And one of the things that I did is I researched businesses that were comparable to mine that failed, and I tracked down the owners of those businesses, and ask them why they failed. And it was awkward phone call in the beginning, but they now take my calls and they're rooting me on, as based on what we're trying to do. So I think, if you can take the position of why things, people that have already gone through it and learn what the mistakes they made so you don't make the mistakes. And it's tough to do when you got a business that's brand new, like Suzanne has, that no one's ever gone through it, and some of the other folks, but most of us are doing a little bit what's already been done before. And if we can learn what not to do, I think it genesis is a lot faster.
Yeah, thanks. Shani, do you have any, I saw you posted something in the chat there, but any last minute questions? Sid, any last minute questions?
Nothing for me. Just want to point out, a couple of comments in the chat. Colleen mentioned that listening to your stories was eye-opening, and she'll be a part of the Montana Library group that's going to be taking the coaching course, which is really exciting. Basically, Carl's spearheading a partnership with the Montana Library System to deliver some entrepreneurship resources. So that's good to hear. And then Shani mentioned that she's trying to get a business off the ground as well, women and veteran-owned. So she appreciates the insights, and we also just appreciate the time and sharing your expertise with us and getting this out there into the community. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Any last thoughts from anybody? Suzanne, Sarah, Jake? Couple of minutes.
Suzanne, I think you're muted.
Muted. I am muted. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to connect with other rural entrepreneurs. And I think there is a role here for an organization or an association of rural entrepreneurs or something of that nature, because I do think being in the isolation, the physical isolation from centers of capital and from centers of expertise is a unique problem to rural areas. It's in many ways, Montana itself is rural and isolated from the centers of capital. And then when you go outside of the centers within Montana, you really get, feeling alone out there. And so I just would encourage the University of Montana to continue down this line, because I think there's strength in numbers, and there's, making the kind of networks to get the kind of resources available to a rural entrepreneur. It's really important to be able to tap into those. So thanks.
You're welcome. And thanks for sharing that, because that is our charge. Like Sid and I that's what this program is about. And Paul Gladen, as well as the executive director, Accelerate Montana, and being a part of this group. So if you have any ideas, I know you're all busy running your businesses, but if you have any platforms like Slack or Mighty Networks or whatever it might be that you've had some success in, and Suzanne, I think it's in some ways you have this going on, maybe even the platforms you're working in, a platform or a way that we might facilitate that, we'd be happy to do the heavy lifting and the work to try to create something. But that's what we've been working on the last year or so, and I'm at the place now starting to try to put that together.
Well, I think the more local you are, the more Montana focused it is, the more effective it is for people engaged in it. I've joined a number of networks that are national in scope, and it's really hard to get noticed at that level. And so, building locally and connecting people and finding who are the investors that will take the step to support something in rural Montana. Who are they? And we should be listening to them. What do they need? What should we be bringing forward to them? To make it as applicable to the actual problems and the actual mechanisms that are available to us to use. Because there are there's high-tech alliances, there's all of these kinds of things, but that you get diffused, and then again, that's because Montana's small in itself, and then rural Montana, people just pass you over.
Yeah. Well, we'll take that to heart, and we'll go to work on it. I want to be mindful of all of your time. It's 1 after, so I really appreciate this. It really has been a fantastic group, and your insights are great. Although we didn't have a lot of people on the line, we do record this and put it up on our webpage and put it on our social media too, and we'll share it with you here as soon as we can the next day or so you can share it. But thank you all. Have a delightful afternoon and a good end to your week.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.